now. So as I said, you can be sending questions in, but we're going to start with something just to get going. Clarity that you
I had an athletic dream that was like my dream, external expression. But I kept getting, as a preacher, I wasn't really familiar with him, but I knew he had a powerful ministry. And I woke up in the dream. I woke up within the dream, and his hands were on me, and it was like waves of electricity were just pulsating through my body. And then he took his hands off me, and he looked at me, and he said, "Jordan, quit doubting who you are. You're called to the bride." Then there's this chalkboard, and it had like law school, all business, all these different things, but in the middle it said, "It's the bride." And he just kept circling. He said, "It's the bride, Jordan. It's the bride. It's the bride, Jordan." He said, "Quit doubting who you are." Then he laid his hands on me again. I began literally pulsating with this powerful flow of electricity, and then I gasped out of a dead sleep in the middle of the night, like like panting, and like literally that sounds like so like crazy. I like went back to sleep and forgot about it for like 2 weeks.
Wow.
And then, like 2 weeks later, I was just like, no grace. And I was like, what's going on? Like, studies, everything. And God was like, "Do you remember what I spoke to you?" And it all came back to me. I was like, oh yeah, that was pretty profound, wasn't it? So sometimes, like, I don't know, I'm just slow. So that was kind of my like calling moment if I were going to pinpoint it. So.
All right, that's good. Okay, Tracy, I'll reframe the question just a little bit.
Okay.
I know that you have multiple dreams, and many of us do. We have multiple dreams, right? We're not one-dimensional people. So what was a moment that you felt, give an example, that you felt like something that you were dreaming about was something you had permission to step into and not just something that you were dreaming about in the wrong season or wasn't something you were supposed to pursue?
Oh my gosh. First of all, it's hard to follow up because I don't have those dramatic moments. I was trying to think of a dream I've had, and I was like, oh, mine are just weird, not prophetic or profound. It's difficult for me because to answer that, only because I feel like I'm still developing in whatever God's dream is for my life. You know, I just don't ever think of it as a destination. So it's hard for me to wrap around like knowing exactly the moment because I just think every season of my life has been a part of God's dream. It's always fit. And it's like, there's been moments that it doesn't make sense, sort of interrupts it. And God used tragedy in my life and difficult situations to move me into what he had. But I remember when I started preaching, and I ran away from ministry. I didn't want to preach because growing up in it, I just was like, I've sat through every conference, every message. I've heard every preacher, and it was great, and I loved it. I love church. I've always loved the local church. But I just wanted to do politics, or I wanted to influence in other ways. And God just used my story and wow, I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. And I go, that sounds weird because I think I've always been where I was supposed to be, but it was like there was a settling of all the restless years of not understanding what that meant or what this season was or why God had me here. And all of a sudden there was this, it was like I could exhale and I was like, I'm where I'm supposed to be.
Like internal peace.
Yeah, it was just like such a good feeling, and then I could just run. But at the same time, I feel like God's story is not over. So it's like there's other dreams, there's other things God's going to do. But for me, at least, that gives me the sense of, okay, I am where I'm supposed to be, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. So I don't know if that answered it all.
That's a perfect answer.
But I respond, I don't answer.
All right, Addison, we'll throw the same question at you, or any variation of the question.
I feel like I kind of answered that today. Don't you?
Yes, I do feel like that. I feel like I just got called out for not listening to the message.
Leads to foresight. So this whole idea, and I mentioned it yesterday during the breakout, your calling isn't discovered. It's not just about you. Tracy, you hit on that today. It's not about you. And it's also not a singular discovery, meaning it's is like deep waters, but a man of understanding draws it out. It takes a lifetime to understand why God put you on this earth. A lifetime. So for me, I've had these moments in my journey, you can call them mountaintop experiences, where it's like, eureka, this is it. God, this is why you created me. But God gives us the mountaintops so that we can learn how to hope. And he gives us the valleys so we can learn what faith is. You need both. And then his love energizes the entire process. Up and down, up and down. So for me, I've had those moments. And honestly, I'm stepping into one of those moments right now where I'm seeing my life through a new lens. I'm seeing opportunity through a new lens, and he's asking new things of me in this season. But looking back now, the last really like 16 years of my working life, they are starting to make sense in ways that I couldn't see in those seasons.
That's a really good answer. Thank you. I promise I'll listen next time. All right, now I'm going to grab from some of the questions that have been coming in over the text thread. So this is a pretty interesting question. I'm going to throw it at, I think, Tracy. This one, just like in your past throughout your life, share your experience of seasons when you were in ministry and single and how you walked that out well. And I'm curious about that specifically. I just think that as a male or a female, there are different challenges that come with that. So I'd love you to speak to it.
Yeah. Being single in ministry, being a female in ministry, first of all, has a set of challenges. And then being single female in ministry is compounded challenges, which my personality, my name Tracy means bold as a lion. So I think I like slightly enjoy it. You know, I'm like, bring it on. Okay. People say you can't do it. I'll try. But there's definitely challenges, but I think that's true for anybody in ministry and whatever season of life they're in. I think for me, it was just still trusting God. Like, you're giving your life to God, you know, in ministry, and you're loving people and you're pastoring them, and you still have like desires in your heart. And then you have to guard your heart and not think, okay, God, are you caring for everybody else but not me? It was more just protecting and guarding my heart and my mind from thinking that God was somehow cared about everybody else, but he was somehow distant to me, like in my desires. Because I knew always, God, you have a great plan, and I was never really worried. I think what helped me is I was not the girl who wanted to get married at 20 and have 12 babies. So I think that helped. I mean, I always knew God had like a great call on my life that he wanted to use me, and I'm grateful, because I probably wouldn't have done half the things that I've done in ministry or just in life if I would have gotten married really young. Not to say that that's not God's plan for many people, but for me, I'm actually very, very grateful. And I learned to do ministry. As a female, I think it helps. I learned to do ministry and walk through it not alone. I've always been surrounded by people, but not as a pastor's wife. And growing up in church, that's kind of like, you know, like kind of what's thrown on women is like, oh, you're going to preach one day because you're going to marry a pastor. I'll remember as a young girl, I don't even know why I said this. I had no understanding. I had no theological framework for what I believed in women in ministry or anything. But someone came up to me and was like, oh, so are you going to marry a pastor one day? And I was probably like 10. And I looked at him and I was like, no, I'm going to be the pastor. Like,
Come on.
I was like, why is this a question? And I like honestly didn't even know what I was saying. I was like, but I'm so grateful I was nurtured in a church in an environment that has championed women and championed people in ministry, whether you're single, married, you have 20,000 kids, or you know, you're still waiting to have children. It doesn't matter. God wants to use you in the season that you're in. So don't let it be a crutch too.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Tracy. Okay, our next question is for Addison. Addison, how has your journey as a father or a husband complemented or challenged your ministry? So I know we spoke to this a little bit in the ministry track yesterday, but how do you navigate that?
Yeah, something I shared yesterday is I really don't think you can separate your life into all these nice little areas. It just like doesn't work. I've tried. I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. Any ones out there? Come on. Okay, a few of you. So I would love to believe that's possible, but it's not. It's just not. So for me, it's all about being in the moment. What is required of me in a moment? Because the idea even of multiple priorities is an illusion. By its very definition, priority means one thing. So what is the one thing in that moment that is required of me? And when you have a lot that is given to you, you will have things that will compete as priority for that moment. So it's having the wisdom, it's having the grace, it's having the presence of mind to take a step back and say, what is important for me to give in this moment? And so on the home front, the work front, the marriage front, that's how I have to live my life. There really isn't a template that works. I'm being honest with you. I grew up in a family that had parents who traveled and speak all the time. And considering how often they were gone, there should have been negative ramifications in our family. But there weren't because of the way my parents navigated their home life. And there are a lot of other families who have parents that spend a lot of time at home, and they have a lot of challenges in the home. So again, it's about how you navigate those priorities.
That's really good. Thank you. Okay, this question I'm going to put toward Jordan. How would you describe the difference between the Holy Spirit calling you to wait for fruit to come from a dream versus the Holy Spirit calling you to transition to a different dream? Meaning, how do you discern the difference between being in a waiting season and supposed to wait faithfully or needing to let go?
Like, I think peace is huge. You follow peace, you don't follow opportunity. There's always opportunity, and especially as you grow in favor, opportunity is going to get even more. So I think peace is really important, just like that inner peace, that you really can't conjure that. There's really nothing on earth that can create peace within me, and so probably the bigger the decision I make, the more peace that I'm seeking in the midst of that. And the reality, and a lot of times with decisions, is if God will tell you yes or no often when it comes to obedience, when you're making decisions like out of a servanthood, which is the foundation of our relationship. But as we mature, God will actually start putting decisions back on us. And so you'll be like, what should I do? You might feel peace. And so if I feel peace, but I don't feel a sense of I feel peace on multiple, because I feel sometimes that's what I hear. I feel peace when I think about 3 different options. I'm like, well, then God's probably giving you a choice in those 3 different options, but I'm always trying to be governed by peace. And so one of the prayers I pray is God, I want your wisdom and your peace to govern every decision that I make. So it's I'm just drawn. I love peace. I love peace. So I would just never want to make a decision that I don't have peace. And then invite community. You need to have consistent processors in your life that know your patterns, because we can talk in a one-off situation. We usually have justifications for why we do the things we do. So if somebody doesn't have the perspective of the patterns of how I process life and how my emotions come out, and if I get really excited about things and I'm hyped on things, but when you walk with people long enough, you know their patterns. So you need people that know your patterns that say, hey, speak into this decision with me, because you're being spirit-led. So that's just kind of
really
what
good.
comes to mind.
Thank you, Jordan.
So as a father, I'm really invested in my children, figuring out what they're supposed to do with their lives. I'm not trying to hide that from them. I think sometimes we have this idea of God as someone who's trying to hide the plans that he has for us. And as my kids grow and mature, I give them more liberty to make decisions. When they're very young, I'm like, okay, hey, this is what you need to do. This is when you need to do it. This is why you need to do it. Now, I have a son who's almost 10. I give him a lot of freedom to make decisions. Now, I have given him values that I'm like, hey, these are the decisions. This is the type of decision that you want to make. But that's a part of learning and growing, is taking those risks and taking those steps of faith so you can see, okay, this is what it means to learn independence for the sake of learning interdependence. Because that's the goal. We go from dependence to independence to interdependence. And you can't learn interdependence until you first experience independence.
That's really good. All right, you ready for the next question? Is this good, guys? Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm going to give this question to you, Tracy, because this is kind of a clarifying point from last night with a twist. It's about relationships. How do you discern whether or not in a relationship that seems to be failing, the Lord is telling you to put manure on it, or to maybe recognize that that's not a healthy relationship? And it doesn't have to be romantic, just with a friend, family member, partner, whatever.
Okay, I'll answer the question, but I won't answer it in regards to the text, because the text is not referring to relationships, if that's fair. So I won't say, okay, in that context in Luke chapter 13, Jesus is not talking about relationships. He's talking about the individual person. He's talking about individual lives. So that's just me, sorry. That's the way that I'll answer it. But I will answer, okay, how do you manage then? Do you give up on a friend, or do you keep, or a relationship, do you keep working towards reconciliation? That's kind of, is that... That's challenge, because it's not, I don't think, the heart of God that we give up on people and that we cut people off. However, there could be seasons if there's a relationship that is toxic and unhealthy and pulls you out of like community with God, community with others, or what God's, like doing in and through your life, then I think that there is a healthy separation that's needed. I know a lot of people will, stay in unhealthy relationships. Girls will do this a lot in abusive relationships. They'll stay in an abusive relationship, and it always blows my mind. But there is this attachment. I really do think we have to be careful especially when it comes to romantic relationships, those soul ties and things that you connect with other people. It becomes very difficult then to like separate yourself from that when it's unhealthy. So you need to have counsel. I think you need to have healthy biblical counsel to come alongside of you. Don't have relationships, friendships, or otherwise in secret anyway. It needs to be out in the open and in community. And kind of back to Jordan's point, when he was talking about just in this last question, is it helps to have that collaboration, that community part. Invite community to help you even in those relationships, because it might be someone that goes, hey, that friend's not good for you. And what? Yeah, your friends will know. The people who are close to you will be like, hey, I'm noticing you're starting to talk like this, act like this. That's not healthy. Good relationships will make you better. Good relationships will make you stronger. Good relationships will make you healthier. And if they're not doing that, then don't think of it as, I'm cutting them off. I'm gonna like they're dead to me. It's like, no, they're still human being created in God's image. But you can separate yourself. And sometimes, and this is what I tell a lot of people, it's hard for them to take that. I say, it might be for a season. Maybe come back around in a few years and God can restore it. And I believe that God wants to restore relationships, but God needs to get involved in that. Like, that's not an isolated movement, like we restore a relationship, But I would say one of the strongest things to have people that you trust around you. Get your pastors involved, small group leaders, friends, and let them tell you what that relationship is really doing. One of the things that scares me the most when couples get together, the first thing I always look for is, are they better together? Are they going after the things of God more? Are they healthier? Are they stronger? All those kind of things. I don't look for, the right chemistry, and are they just like happy and having fun? It's like, no. And that's the same with friendship. It's like those relationships should move you and push you towards the things of God, not away. And if it does, then just ghost them a little bit for, just a millennial term. I just learned what woke was this morning. So I would just say, get people to help you and pray for the person. God will restore it. Always believe for restoration. But you have to have some forgiveness, and you have to have some space, I think, before there can be reconciliation and restoration.
That's good. Thank you so much. Quick, by show of hands, how many of you know what woke means? I just want to know. Okay, see, it's still coming up. I'll explain later. You can come find me. Okay, so this question is for you, Jordan. Has there been a time in your life where you felt disqualified to do what you felt like you were called to do? And in order to apply this to more people, I'd say, what advice would you give to somebody who feels disqualified either via their past or via talents to do what they're called to do, or they feel they're called to do?
Me and Addison were kind of talking about this earlier. Absolutely. Being in your 20s as a pastor is just awkward. Like, at best, I'm a peer with people I'm pastoring. At worst, they're my father's age, So, yeah, it's really uncomfortable sometimes. And I remember one of the first ministry trips when we went to India, the first thing, I was already vulnerable about leading this team of people that had paid all this money. Like, oh God, please, I hope that they get blessed these 10 days in India. And I was so busy just with all those dynamics, I don't think I ever thought about how vulnerable the experience was, that the first time I was preaching was to 500 pastors. And I get on a stage to 500 pastors, and I look out at these men that are all twice my age, looking at me like, who is this kid? And I'm like, I don't really actually know, why I'm teaching you how you've they've been persecuted. Many of them knew people that are dead because of the gospel, and so yeah, you just stand there like, oh my gosh, and it's at that times I would say that I draw strength from both the promise of God on my life, and then also like the fact that, and this is why I really, one of the things that I probably distaste more than anything is self-promotion. And what we don't realize is it actually steals our confidence from us, because like God is the God of impossibilities, and like he's going to use us to do things that we're not qualified for. That's grace. Like that is the reality of grace. We're never qualified in my own merit, my own strength, in my own intellect, in my own whatever. Like he's not a respecter of persons. He just loves us. He puts grace on us. But I draw confidence on knowing that I didn't self-promote my way to a platform. You promoted me here. You called, you moved, you invited me, you ushered me in. So even though my knees are knocking when I'm standing there, I know that you called me here, and if you called me here, then you're going to sustain me, and you're going to flow through me, and you're going to use me. And so I think that is probably what I draw strength from, but it's constant vulnerability. And I think that that's one of the myths of the platform and the leadership is it's almost, we want leaders to be Superman, like so strong and bulletproof, but you know, there's oftentimes I'm very vulnerable coming into a message, and I'm like, Lord, I hope this is going to speak to somebody, and I hope this is like theologically true, and like seriously, these thoughts go through your mind all the time. I was talking with a pastor 3 weeks ago who has been in ministry for like 4 decades, has counseled thousands of people, and he was like, you know, what's your hardest part of your job, Jordan? I gave some answers. I said, what's the hardest part of your job? He said, honestly, preaching. He said, I still sometimes will be like on Friday going, I have nothing to offer these people. And I'm like, you're one of the wisest people I've ever like gotten to have a conversation with. How could you think that? But like, we all feel vulnerable. I don't think that ever changes. And it's in our weakness he's made strong. So don't self-promote. That way you can actually be at rest and peace in the midst of your vulnerability, because you know he's good. He put you there for a reason. So
That's so good. Thank you. Yeah, I see some praise hands in the back. That's a good word. Okay, this next question is for Addison, and it was sent via the text. I'm going to read actually their words. Can you share how men of God should pursue a girl? So this is like a very loaded question. But you can unpack that however you want.
I've been out of the game for a long time. Like 12 years. Yeah, I mean, okay, so can I set up an interaction, right? Okay,
Yes.
so is this like a man of God and a woman of God?
Yeah, we're going to say a man of God and a woman of God.
Because I did missionary dating, like full-on flirt to convert.
Oh, wow.
My wife was a heathen. Completely biblically illiterate. Didn't even know what John 3:16 said. I asked her, I was like, do you know what John 3:16 says? And she's like, no. She's like, is that in the Bible? I was like, yes, that's in the Bible. I'm not kidding. Led her to the Lord 2 days after our first date. Knew I loved her 2 days after that, and knew we were going to be married a couple days after that. It was wild, y'all. And I'm not like that. She's not like that. She was a full-on player. She had 2 boyfriends at the time. 2 boyfriends. She was on drugs. Anyways, crazy story. So, that's what I'm saying. I don't know if you want me answering this question.
I do. I want you to answer the question.
Yeah. You know what? Yeah. So I'm like trying to think about this within a Christian framework, like when both people actually love God and everything. Okay, so I will say this. This is something that my wife said that she loved about me is I did not play any games. And she said, I honestly thought you were playing a game by not playing any games. And I think there's something to that. I mean, it's like, be real. There's an appropriate level and measure of vulnerability based on the level of intimacy that you have with someone. We would joke about it all the time. We'd be like, intimacy praying together, that's actually a more intimate form of communion than sex. And in some ways, honestly, it is. Like praying together in certain settings, like that's very intimate. So, sorry, there's a whole backstory there. That doesn't make any sense to y'all without context, but I'm not gonna take the time to explain the backstory. So I think I've been out of the game for so long. Y'all are stumping me with this question. I think being real, like, and taking appropriate steps, like, hey, let's get coffee. Don't be creepy. Don't be like asking them out on this full-on date or whatever. Just like do coffee a few times. Let them know that you're interested in them, interested in getting to know them. You don't have to be like, hey, I'm committing to marry you on that first date.
Really?
If you feel like, and if you feel like God's telling you it's your spouse, probably don't tell them that out the gate. All right? Okay, there we go. I'm remembering some things now. I think there's something. All right, I'm going to speak to my real situation, though, because that's where I'm comfortable.
I would love to hear that.
So what was so powerful about my wife's and I's dynamic is God gave me the ability to see her not just as she was, but how she could be and how she would be one day. And so I interacted with her from that place. And I was able to speak things over her and into her. Like, he gave me prophetic words for her, and she had no idea what a prophetic word was. And it freaked her out. But she knew it was real. So basically, I'm saying I did everything I'm telling you not to do. I'm done. I didn't do this. Sorry.
All right, you were a trooper with that one. Thank you. Thanks for sharing your story, though. I mean, that's what really happened, so
She did end up going to Bible school, though,
that's amazing.
because she thought she had to go to Bible school to marry a preacher. I wasn't a preacher, but I guess because I was the son of a preacher. And that's a Whitney Houston song, right? Anyway, she went to Bible school, and I wasn't allowed to date her because it's super legalistic Bible school. We weren't even allowed to talk. So I wrote her every single day for 275 days. I had over 400 pages worth of letters that I gave to her when she graduated from this Bible school.
Take notes, everyone.
Yeah, so that's some intense stuff. I'm not telling y'all to start there, but I knew I had a conviction. I had a vision, and I think that's something that we all need. We need a conviction and we need a vision when we go into a relationship.
That's
and
really
that
good.
forms with time, it forms with experience, and don't try to force something that's not there. Take time, let it develop, don't rush it, and then you'll know when it's time to express yourself in deeper forms of intimacy.
That's really good. Either of you two want to speak to that? Okay. I figured that
We're
would be
the
your
wrong
answer.
people to ask.
Okay.
Kidding.
All right. Well, this next question is actually in reference to something you said a bit ago about not liking self-promotion and not wanting to engage in self-promotion. I'd actually like to hear from both of you on this one, Tracy and Jordan. But they want to know, if you do feel called to preach and you're not having the opportunity to do that, how do you steward that desire without engaging in self-promotion, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just tell you, like, my story with it. So first of all, just, like, generally speaking, even when we started this church, I literally told people, like, I had a really successful Christian businessman look at me and say, you're 25, you're basically stupid if you think that millennials are going to come and you're going to be able to have money to run a church. He said, you need to go and you need to fundraise X amount. I can hook you up with these 15 contacts, da-da-da-da-da. And I walked away from that meeting and I was like, that sounds like so much work, like to go pitch my vision, like to get you to back it financially. And I just said, God, I said, honestly, I don't have enough energy to try to strive a church into existence. I said, I kind of want to do it that, like, if you're not in it, it will fail, and it will fail quickly. Because, again, I don't want the anxiety of having to be like, is this me or is this God? So I just generally will try to live my life in ways that I will be 100% certain it was God because of how I stewarded my heart through it. Does that make sense? So that's like a general thing. With preaching, if you believe God's called you to preach or do whatever, like, you can still steward that without promoting. So what I used to do, I was on staff at a church, I just prayed. I think that was my job, to pray, because I didn't really do anything else. So the first year, but I would go in at night and I would stand in the sanctuary, it was empty, and I would preach. And there was one night I was just preaching my heart out, and then this guy's like, "Hey, Jordan!" He'd snuck in the side door. He's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, He's like, "Are you preaching on Sunday?" I was like, No, I just got carried away, But literally, it was like I would preach, and I would see in my heart, I would see the people, and I'd say, "Lord," and the Lord eventually invited me and opened doors, but that's how I stewarded the promise. So I was being faithful. I was trying to put myself in places where I could learn to operate in the anointing, but I was like, I won't ask people to come. It's just awkward. I would just never do that. So
That's good. I'd love to hear you speak to that, Tracy.
No, and I love how you ended, because that's exactly what I was going to say. One of the things, and one of my favorite things as in ministry and pastoring is raising up preachers. I love teaching people to study the Bible and to preach. And everything, when I start my little small group with all of them, I say the number one requirement for you to preach is that you got to love people and you got to love the word. And if you don't have those two ingredients, there's no point in you preaching. And so I really just feel like there's those two ingredients have to be there. You got to love God's people, and you got to love his word. And if you love his word so much and you love his people so much, he's going to give you and develop words for you. As for the timing, I think for a long time, I think deep down, I was like, I think I could probably do that. I could probably preach. You know, like growing up in ministry and watching preaching, you're like, I bet I could do that. But I never pursued it in an active way. I gave myself to the kingdom, to the local church. I served. I've done every single thing you can do in church. I've done janitorial work. I've done prayer ministry. I've led women's Bible studies. I've done things with interns. I made copies and worked as an admin. I was a receptionist. I was like I was an administrator. I led worship. I did all these things before I ever stood on a platform and preached. And the thing I'm most proud of when it comes to just the journey of it, I have never once asked for an opportunity to preach. And I have a dad I could have asked. I have a brother, a brother-in-law, a cousin. I have family deep in ministry all around me. I never once asked to preach. I just gave myself to whatever God was asking me to do in that season, and I did it with all of my heart. And then when the time was right and God had developed what he wanted to in me, he gave me an opportunity, and it was terrible. First, when you start, you're awful at it. And it's fun to watch you even grow in the gift. So you're not even going to be good when you start, but just wait for God to open the door. And when he does, it's the right time, and you didn't push a door open. And you'll be so proud too, to look back and go, I wasn't trying to weasel my way into an opportunity. Trust me, preaching is hard, y'all. And if you want to do it, more power to you, but give yourself to the word. You better love people, and you better love the word, and let it be God's timing, because you are held responsible for those words that come out of your mouth when you stand on a platform and with a microphone, and you go home that night and you feel every word you preached. And there is a weight and there's a responsibility, and it's beautiful and it's an honor, but it is not like, you're around great preaching that make it look easy. I mean, Jordan gets up and you're like, oh, I could do that, because it's a grace. So don't just think that everyone should do it, first of all, because I think it's a call of God. And it's not the highest call. It's not the greatest thing in the world. Yeah. There's a lot of other things that you got to do. And I promise you this, I loved every single role I've ever held in church as much as being a preacher.
That's really good. And on that note, I know that these questions are geared toward ministry or preaching specifically, because all of these people are in ministry, but that is applicable whether you're in business, wherever you're working, self-promotion and all of those things. Going down low and slow, as we've talked about a lot, is so important. So all of that can apply whatever vocation that you find yourself in. The next question is for you, Addison. And it is related to ministry, but again, this can apply anywhere. They asked, do you have an example of a time where God exposed or there was an exposing of a lack of integrity in an area of your life, job, and what was that like, having that be exposed?
Yeah, that's a really great question. This happened like 4 months ago, so it's pretty recent. I was in Sweden, and I was speaking. And unlike Tracy, I never looked at my parents or looked at church and was like, I could do that. I was terrified of being on the pulpit. I would hide from this. I had people ask me to speak, and I was like, absolutely not. I would run from it. And so I knew this is way outside my comfort zone. And God, as I've mentioned, pushed me out of my comfort zone and said, hey, you need to start doing this. And I knew how bad I was. I did. And I would have to rely on his grace, and he would show up. And it was amazing. It was powerful. I would get off the stage and I'd be like, that wasn't me. That was another person. And then I went to Sweden this year, and it was in March. And I had been there before. They invited me back. And when I went before, it was like heaven came to earth. It was like 4 hours of ministry afterwards. People were getting saved. I mean, it's just one of those really powerful nights. And I was on my way to Sweden. I was flying there, and God gave me 2 Corinthians 5. It was talking about eternal treasure in jars of clay. And I was like, all right, God, like, that's great. I'm speaking on something different, but that's great. I'm glad you gave that to me. And I went and I spoke on Saturday night. It was the Saturday night of the conference. And I have dinner with the pastors afterwards, and it's a wonderful dinner. And then I step out of the building. And the moment I step out of the building, the fear of God fell on me. I had no idea I'd done anything wrong. The fear of God fell on me, and I felt a weight and a conviction that I had never felt in my entire life. And I went back to my hotel, and I just started like praying, like interceding, like what the heck is going on? And God just said, you know what? You've gotten pretty good without me. And I was like, dear God. And I just started bawling. And it hit me that night, like, and it was a wonderful service, y'all. Like, it was a great service. I had many people come up to me afterwards and be like, man, like my life will be forever changed. Like, it was a great experience. And it hit me in that moment. I'm like, God, what was left on the table tonight? And he brought back 2 Corinthians 5. You know, he knows the end from the beginning. So he brought back 2 Corinthians 5. And what he said, Addison, when you started communicating, you had this jar of clay, and it was very insignificant. And you knew that the only way for it to be filled is for you to empty yourself out. And think of it like when you empty a jar. Think of the liquid that's coming out of the jar forming to increase the size and the capacity of the jar. And he's like, you would continually do that. You would empty yourself before you went up to serve. He's like, on this trip, you didn't empty yourself. You went in full of what you had. You didn't surrender what you had to me. And he said, what's scary is that it was good. And honestly, y'all, like, that still messes with me. And it's 4 months, I'm 4 months removed from that. And it still messes with me. And like what Tracy was saying, what Jordan was saying, like this is a privilege. And it's an act of service. It's a great act of service. But that's all it is an act of service. We're not up here to bolster our egos, to feed some type of significance. We're given this status, we're given this position for the sake of service. That's all this is. And so if you're like, man, I want to be a speaker, honestly, those are speakers. Okay? Those are speakers. I'm just being real. Those are speakers. Y'all, I've seen it. Tracy's seen it. Jordan's seen it. I've been behind the scenes. I've seen how ugly this world can be when people lose sight of the fact that all we are servants. That's all it is. We have this eternal treasure in jars of clay. And we're servants. And so you can serve wherever you find yourself right now. So if you feel called to preach, to teach, guess what? There are opportunities right now for you to do that. And as Tracy said, like when you start doing it, you're going to be bad. So be bad in private. That's the mercy of God. Be bad in private. Be bad when the stakes are low. You don't want to be bad when the stakes are high.
So good. The mercy of God. That's good. Yeah, that deserves a hand, a praise wave, whatever you want to give it. A wave offering. I keep on calling it a praise wave. Okay, we're going to go to our next question. I'm going to put this one toward you, Tracy. It's essentially around how you navigate disappointment. And has there been a time where you felt blindsided by something the Lord has helped you to walk through or led you through?
Yeah, you're going to feel disappointed a lot in life and in ministry. You feel, I think, and so I'll speak from a ministry. Is that okay? Like disappointment from that? Because disappointment in general in life is difficult. In ministry as a pastor, it's really hard. And like Addison just shared, that was so beautiful. We are servants and we give our lives and so much of our heart and our time to people. And for me, probably one of the greatest disappointments is when people betray that. and just like leave and throw shade on you and say things about not even just you personally, but about your community or church is weird, right? It's like a family, but we're a highly dysfunctional family. And so a lot of the disappointments for me growing up as a kid, absolutely from the church. And as an adult in ministry, from the church. And so I think it's been the grace of God that has helped navigate my parents did a really good job with this. They never let like what people did or said within church paint a bad picture of who Jesus was in the church. They did such a good job. They were really good at protecting us as kids. Like we weren't stupid, so we listened and we found things out. But they did such a good job of separating, like just because a Christian acts in a certain way, that's not a reflection on who Jesus is or his church. And so I was raised with that, which really helped me as I got into ministry, and then I'm kind of experiencing disappointment firsthand. I just always go back to that. I always go back to, God, this is not necessarily a reflection of your church or even of what all Christians are like. Can I just be honest? Our world just needs a lot more forgiveness for one another. We just need a lot more grace. And I think if we could do one thing, which we need to do a million things, but if we could do one thing, if we held everyone to this, if we held ourselves to the same expectation we hold other people to, this world would look a lot different. If I have an expectation for you and I live and I hold myself to that same standard, a lot of things will get, that's not such a big deal. Maybe a situation in a church or an offense will not grow into the seemingly like toxic, unreal thing. I think what's hard, and especially as a pastor, is people seem to hold me to a standard that they don't hold themselves to. And then you're like, oh, I don't know how to manage this. So within that, have a heart that's willing to forgive and open arms to people, loving them. Disappointment is inevitable. And it's going to happen, but it's not the end of your life. It's not. In fact, disappointments, and I've said this several times over this weekend to people, my best seasons are the seasons I've grown the most, where God has done the most in my life, have been the hardest.
Really, yeah.
Usually where there was disappointment. So, when I look back, I'm very fond of those seasons, and I'm actually fond of that when God has allowed some disappointment. I'm grateful because of what God was able to do in and through it.
So well put. And I love what you said about not allowing disappointment to color your vision of who God is. That is so important. Did you have something you wanted to add, either of you? Okay. All right. Jordan, this question's for you. It's going to be one of our last questions. We want to know how you battle comparison with people around you, both doing things that you want to be doing or maybe not. So how do you battle comparison personally? And
I don't struggle like looking at Tyler make this incredible painting and I'm not like, oh my gosh, I'm so far behind, Lord. I mean, it's just like I'm not comparing myself to that. Who I will compare myself to is usually other preachers, other communicators, and typically I will compare myself to people that are like ridiculously further down the path than me, and for some reason, like I think it's the millennial syndrome, it's like I should be there. I should be operating in that level of anointing instead of just kind of being like present with myself. So, I grew up in an athletic paradigm that I think was fueled by a raging insecurity that I covered up by all my success. So then when all the success and all the cheers and all the noise went away that all my athletics created, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm so insecure. And then I found the Lord and I didn't. He found me in a really profound way. And all this passion came up in me, but I transitioned all my broken athletic paradigm into my spirituality, and I just started becoming the same way I would slave to the golf course. It was about prayer and the word, and the thing that was tricky is those things started like bearing fruit in my life, but it was still like there was this insecurity that was fueling all of it. So I say this to say is I've literally had to like send messages and repent to people in college because God was humbling me in college. He was not exalting me, and I just kept trying to like like, it wasn't like I was self-promoting or anything. It was just like, wow, like, I feel like I'm stuck in a hole. And then I would see people, and I like knew that there was an anointing on me, but I would see other people just flourishing, and I would just judge them. Like, I would criticize, I would whatever, because of my insecurity, because I just felt so insignificant compared. Does that make sense? So I had some pretty big, like, breakthroughs where the Lord, like, I had to look at it all, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is filthy, and how, like, insecure I was. And so I got really, really aware, repented, humbled myself, and said, okay, like, I don't want to be that type of person. I don't want to live intimidated by powerful people. I don't want to, all, you know, and how, like, it's, if you just start destroying it in college. It was when I was kind of an older brother, and then tell him. It was like, but I was, but I did it.